Okay, so we'll get started. So this is the final presentation that we presented at the Heart Hackathon, and it's modified slightly, like Madhu said. So we took out the commercial section essentially and replaced that with a bit about the team structure and how the team was managed. So um, we are Team Bath Heart, and I'll be going over, and my team will be going over the development of a novel total artificial heart. Today we'll be covering a number of things, including, like I said, team introduction, team structure, background, future work, the TBH24 design itself. Those two should be swapped around, but anyways, and then a conclusion. So to get started, and during the Heart Hackathon, we mentioned about intellectual property. So, as part of protecting our intellectual property, we haven't disclosed much about our internal mechanism, and that's because we're figuring out ways of patenting our design. And as part of that, we don't want to disclose too much about it. So that's just a notice. So for those of you who don't know who we are Team Bath Heart. We are based in the UK, and we are the University of Bath's only medical engineering competition team, and we're designing a novel total artificial heart. Um, Next slide. So we take great pride in the diversity of our group. So we now have a 50-50 split between male and female team members, and we have more than 80 students ranging from mechanical, electrical, chemical engineering, natural sciences, and many more, who are all contributing to one mission. And it's very exciting for us. Next slide. So in Japan, we had a nice split between our technical and commercial team, so they could each provide sort of a unique perspective between of all the work that they've done. So a bit about how the team is structured and just sort of advice and project management and whatnot. I'll go over that now. So we have these roles that are assigned specifically. Our team is huge. Like I said, we have nearly 80 people now, but within that, we've got specific roles, and the core team actually is around only 20 people. So that's much easier to manage. And this is sort of the breakdown. We have team lead, which is me this year, and I've handed over to the next team lead for next year. But I look over the technical and commercial teams, and each of those teams has a technical and commercial lead. Within the technical team, we always have at least two mechanical leads, two electrical leads, and two biology leads. And now we're introducing a lab coordinator as well to take care of our lab and build room and so on. And on the commercial side, we have loads of more specific roles because I think it helps give everyone sort of a purpose and know what their job is. So we have a business team, marketing team, and quality and regulatory team. And within that, we have specific managers who are responsible for certain tasks. So finance and sponsorship manager. We have social media who take care of all the social media, branding, events, website. And then within quality and regulatory, we have a Q&R manager, an IP manager, and now we're introducing a sustainability manager. And all of these sort of just fall under the commercial team. And yeah, I kind of just play a hand in each of those roles sometimes, or just communicating with the technical and commercial teams and making sure that everything's getting done, or if anything is not getting done, then I will do it or we'll pass it on to someone else. So that's just sort of how it works in terms of roles. And then next slide. Within the roles, we have obviously communication is a big thing. So to do that, we obviously have to have a lot of meetings and sometimes too many meetings, but they have to be done. So we have weekly general team meetings, and these are run by the team lead. And this is so that everyone in the team can get together and can go over updates, general updates, technical updates if needed. So it's a nice sort of weekly moment for everyone to get together. We have weekly technical meetings, weekly commercial meetings, and then also sub-team meetings if needed. So that would be social media team meetings and whatnot if they feel that they need them. But yeah, and then on top of that, I also introduced a monthly newsletter, which was sort of an internal newsletter that was distributed within the team so that everyone, on top of the general team meetings, people could be in the loop. And now we're thinking of widening that to our department so that everyone who's sort of contributed to the team can get involved and potentially sponsors as well, because it's quite a nice thing to read. We also had a shared calendar. We have a job board in which we split like jobs, and jobs get assigned and get completed and whatnot. Um, and then we also have kept strong relationships with our universities and supervisors. And this obviously we know that we're very lucky to have because we have a lot of help from our supervisors, and yeah, and it's important to keep that relationship going and keep make sure that because they're the ones who kind of know what to do and what not to do. And then something that I introduced when I became team lead was sort of a feedback system. And I'm hoping that this continues. And it's basically a feedback system for me and the leads to sort of go over. So I will give them feedback and things that they're doing well, things that they're not doing well, and I expect the same back. And then I ask them to pass on that same information and do the same thing with their leads. So it's kind of a nice monthly, or not even monthly, but every so often, whenever it's needed, review kind of system, and it helps sort of smooth things along. So my advice as a project manager is say yes to everything. I think one thing that I found, or that we found as a team, was that saying yes to everything, especially in the early days, because we are a relatively new team and so are the other teams in their universities. I think saying yes to everything, such as sponsorship events or meetings with the university or university events or anything to do with press releases, like we just said yes, even though it was quite time consuming. I think it really helped push our name and push sort of the work we've done. And then the next thing would be focus on recruitment. So when I was speaking to people at the Heart Hackathon, a lot of people were saying that they have trouble with handovers and handing over the knowledge from previous years. And we go through the exact same thing every year because, for example, the eight of us, well, seven of us are graduating now. So there's going to be a big gap between the knowledge that we have and the new team will have. So focusing on recruitment and making sure that the handovers are good as well is quite important. So that's my next point. But you will always also need a bigger team, even though it might be harder to manage, but you can always have people to rely on in the end. And then you can kind of figure out who you can rely on as well. So that's quite important. And I think those two may not seem like they're quite important at the start, but they do end up being important in the end. But yeah. And then having a robust filing system. I say that even though we can't find any files in our filing system, but we do have a pretty robust filing system and we document everything. So once we find something, we know it's there and it's sort of all stored and we follow ISO 13485 or whatever it is. And we make sure that everything's sort of put in there so that at least everything's documented and that makes the handovers a lot easier as well when it comes to it. But besides that, we do recognize that we have a lot of university support. So in the past, how it worked for us was that our team, we have a bunch of competition teams in Bath, but our team specifically would approach the department independently with a proposed budget, and then we would ask them for money. But now that's changed completely, and it changed right before we went to Japan, so quite recently. And now it works by fairly splitting the department money between all the competition teams, and that includes money and space. And that's based on several criteria, such as the budget that they have, the commitment and our contribution to the university, the diversity that we have, leaf assessments, and equality, diversity, and inclusion. So a bunch of criteria, and we have to fill out this form and basically sell ourselves to the university. And they tell us kind of how much we're worth as a competition team, essentially. But that does help push us to do better and do a lot more. And I think it's a nice way to kind of make it fair for all the competition teams to have a fair chance of getting the money that they deserve. So that's a pretty good system that they've put in place very recently, and we're kind of taking advantage of. But yeah, we do recognize that we have a lot of support from the university as well. So now I'll go back to our original presentation. So a bit about why we're doing what we're doing and like our cause as a team. Cardiovascular diseases are the leading cause of death worldwide for both men and women. And there's a clear patient gap between the number of adults waiting for a heart transplant and the number of transplants performed. And this can lead to really long wait times, which means that patients are at risk of dying before a heart becomes available or can become too sick to have a transplant. And on top of this, as you can see here, the criteria for receiving a heart transplant significantly reduces the number of people who can actually get one. So this unmet clinical need is what has led us to our mission statement, and our mission is to develop a novel total artificial heart that is both long-lasting and effective. It must improve survival rates for patients with end-stage heart failure by reducing post-surgery complications and providing a better quality of life. This is what drove us to create TBH23 for the 2023 Heart Hackathon, and we evaluated this design and developed it further to create TBH24. And I will now pass on to Molly, who is our mechanical lead, to go into the details of the TBH24 design.
Thank you, Mansi. So at the beginning of our design process, we outlined our key requirements and determined our target patient profile, which we chose to be a 49-year-old male of average height and weight. From our mission statement, we knew we wanted our device to be long-lasting, reduce the chance of infections by removing the need for percutaneous drivelines, and reduce blood trauma to avoid hemolysis. A full list of design requirements, a few key ones shown on the screen, was developed based on a comprehensive needs analysis of all stakeholders, relevant regulations, and biological research. We then began the ideation phase using the Crazy 8 method to generate as many unique ideas as possible. We then ranked these ideas with a Pew's matrix with the TBH23 as a datum. The TBH24 design is a new and novel development from the TBH23, carrying over the use of artificial ventricles but replacing the string mechanism with a more reliable plate compression system. This has allowed us to reduce the size of the device by over 50%, in turn also reducing the weight. The compression mechanism squeezes the artificial ventricles in a way that mimics the native heart. This ejects blood around the body while avoiding stagnation in the ventricles. During diastole, the ventricles will fill passively, resulting in higher end diastolic volumes at greater atrial pressures, emulating the Frank-Starling mechanism. This means that the device can vary its left and right cardiac output without active control, reducing the risk of volume overload. The device is encased in a titanium alpha-beta alloy shell, split into 3 parts for ease of assembly, which will be laser welded together. A 2-part structure was designed to secure the Foldax tri-leaflet valves and attach the device to the body. The valves are sealed against a flange on the artificial ventricles and clamped down by housing attachments screwed into the underside of the top plate. Clips are then used to secure the polyethylene terephthalate connecting tubes for sutured atrial and arterial connections. The positions of these connections were determined using Vitonomy's V-patient software. We took one of the sample patient's virtual anatomy, whose profile was closest to our target patient, and transferred the position of the connection points into our CAD software. Due to the flexibility of our chosen graphs, this should be adequate to fit our target patient range. Extensive simulation work was done to validate and improve our design. We assessed the longevity of our internal components using finite element analysis software. An area of particular interest was the artificial ventricles during compression cycles. The maximum stress was found to be within our specification, however, we aimed to do further physical testing to verify this due to the complexity of the loading. To help our valve selection, we calculated wall shear and hemolysis index using computational fluid dynamics. It was found that the polymer valves led to lower shear stress than the mechanical valves, so we chose the polymer ones to integrate into our design. Finally, we used ANSYS Fluent to create transient models using pressure inlets and outlets to model the artificial ventricles. The animation on the screen shows a small stagnation point at the bottom of the ventricle, so therefore further iterations are required to try and reduce this. To further validate our design, we aim to prototype as many components as possible. Gravity casting with a wax mandrel was used to manufacture the ventricles out of polyurethane, which was chosen due to its flexibility, high tensile strength, and biocompatibility. The internal surface finish was assessed using a digital microscope, and it was found that PU60 had a better finish than PU30, with an average defect size of only 80 micrometers. The PU60 also produced less air bubbles. Our sponsor Autodesk provided us with great support for prototyping our casing. They 3D printed a version out of a clear resin for visual representation, as well as machining the top plate out of stainless steel for proof of machinability. Here you can see a 5-axis CNC machine that was used to achieve the complicated shapes and surfaces. Our biology team investigated material-induced hemolysis using horse blood. Due to malfunction of our rheometer, we used an orbital shaker with different samples of polyurethane in contact with the horse blood to compare the damage on red blood cells. As shown from the graph, the data suggested that PU30 had slightly better hemocompatibility, but we intend to repeat these tests with more accurate equipment. We also manufactured the internal mechanism of our design and built a test rig to validate the pumping function. Here you can see a video of it pumping water. The team has also developed our own mock circulatory loop, encapsulating both pulmonary and systemic sides, replicating the circulatory system's physical and hemodynamic conditions. We attached our test rig to the MCL and we were able to obtain pressure waveforms and flow rate, but due to complications of testing, these were not representative of the device's performance. I'll now pass over to Ben, one of the electrical leads, to discuss the electrical part of our design.
Thank you, Molly. So our design features an active control system that functions in addition to replicating the passive Frank-Starling mechanism based on adjusting the heart rate by varying the actuation speed. The control system complements the native venous return system to circulate the correct amount of blood around the body. It's a priority-based control system using left atrial pressure as its primary control. When left atrial pressure is within a safe range, then aortic blood oxygen is used to provide finer control. The input sensors have all been tested within their operating ranges, and a test bench has been built for the pulse oximeter to ensure that it will function correctly within the low light conditions of the cardiothoracic cavity. This video shows how the inputs are affected by, shows how the heart rate is affected by changing system inputs. To prevent the use of drive lines, we have chosen to develop transcutaneous power transfer and communication systems. For communications, we have used ANSYS HFSS to develop a human body phantom, a 3-layer model of skin, fat, and muscle to measure the effects of their differing dielectric properties on the antennas. Using this phantom, we have designed internal and external magnetic spiral antennas, the design of which was recently published by a team member. These are designed to minimize induced tissue heating while operating at a frequency of 2.45 gigahertz. These cores have been manufactured and are currently undergoing testing with a physical phantom that we have produced to see how they're impacted by the different tissue layers. For power transfer, we have been using inductive near-field wireless power transfer to power the heart. 2 flexible cores have been designed, again using ANSYS HFSS, and manufactured. Testing of the system has produced 22.9 watts of transfer across the phantom at efficiencies reaching 60%. Thermal testing is currently underway to measure the generated heat of the electronics and the absorbed energy by the body to ensure our system does not produce excess tissue heating. On to future work. This figure shows the outline of the electrical system so far. We're looking to implement a full power system, including an implanted rechargeable battery to ensure the heart is continuously powered. Additionally, an antenna holding system needs to be developed to prevent misalignment, and alongside this, more thermal testing is required to develop the wireless power transfer system to ensure that induced tissue heating remains low enough to prevent any tissue damage. Finally, we're also looking to develop a user interface to provide information like battery level to the patient and to store vital data about the heart functioning for use by clinicians and engineers to maintain the long-term health of the patient. On the mechanical side, our primary focus is size and weight reduction. As you can see from the V patient's image, our current design clashes significantly with the left lung and diaphragm. We intend to use Fusion's generative design features to reduce the weight and size of our internal components, and we're doing additional research into alternative materials for the casing, such as biocompatible polymers and composites. There are also intended design changes for the artificial ventricles to remove the previously mentioned stagnation point, and we also intend to do life cycle testing on the ventricles to test the durability of the polyurethane under continuous compression cycles. We'll continue testing on our mock circulatory loop to test the functionality of our pumping mechanism, including its response to varying atrial pressures. With the reduction in size of the heart, high pressure fluctuations occur within the casing, and so we're looking to develop a compliance chamber to minimize these. I'll now pass back to Mansi, who will conclude.
Thank you, Ben. Also, I'm sorry if anyone can hear a dog barking in the background. There's very loud dogs barking. Anyways, so to conclude, the summary of our design. This shows our target specification against what we achieved with our final design. And we have successfully designed, tested, and prototyped an artificial heart. So we are now really close to achieving our mission statement. And aside from this, we also thought it'd be nice to do a bit of Heart Hackathon feedback, which is in the next slide. And this is just us nitpicking because honestly, everything was amazing. But yeah, a bit of feedback similar to last year's closing event. So one thing that we thought of was releasing the assessment criteria and like any changes to the assessment criteria a bit earlier because they were released quite late this year. But granted, there weren't that big changes, so it was all okay in the end. But just in case, for if there are big changes. And then we also thought that it would be nice to have more feedback on the final presentation itself, and potentially a second marker for each section of the report. I think it's great that there's a different person for marking each section of the report now, because it provides a different perspective, of course, and makes it fair for all the teams. But a second marker might be good, or some sort of justification for some of the marks that we are getting, because we were a bit confused by some sections being maybe much different to other sections, in terms of the marks that they got, and didn't really understand why. Then the other point that we came up with was that it would be nice to have a communications channel set up, and advertised for all the teams, so that we sort of have a communication point, way before the Heart Hackathon, and have one like throughout the year in case we're having any difficulties or just things to talk about, and preparation for the Heart Hackathon. So that ties into more opportunities to network with the other teams prior to the grand final. And finally, more opportunity for public questions after the final presentation, because I think there was 5 minutes of presentation time, but it might be nice to increase that question time, so that we can ask more questions, because I think a lot of people had a lot of questions, and it's good to have that feedback directly after someone's presentation. So yeah, that's it. But again, we are nitpicking because it's all amazing. So yeah, we'd like to thank our sponsors, our supervisors, obviously, who've been a huge, huge help, and any experts that have helped us along the way. And then obviously the Heart Hackathon for providing us with this amazing platform to compete in this competition, and for all of us to meet and work really hard on this project. So thank you so much. And we hope you enjoyed our presentation. Yeah.